The radio went dead at exactly 0400 hours, cutting off mid-transmission from our forward observation post with a sound that wasn't static or interference. It was silence so complete that it felt like the universe itself had stopped transmitting. That's when I knew our routine border patrol along the North Korean DMZ was about to become something that would never appear in any official military record. The briefing at Camp Boniface had been standard for DMZ operations. Our platoon from the 2nd Infantry Division had drawn the assignment to conduct observation and patrol duties along one of the most heavily fortified borders on Earth. The Korean demilitarized zone stretched 160 miles across the peninsula, a 4-kilometer-wide strip of land that separated two nations technically still at war. What made our sector different was its designation as a special observation zone, military code for an area where unusual activity had been reported but never officially documented. Areas where previous patrols had encountered things that didn't fit into standard threat assessments. My squad consisted of soldiers I'd been working with for 8 months, Staff Sergeant Mike Reynolds as assistant squad leader and experienced infantry NCO, Specialist Jake Morrison on communications and surveillance equipment, Corporal Brandon Miller handling our heavy weapons and demolitions, and Private First Class Connor Hayes providing medical support and NBC warfare expertise. We'd all volunteered for DMZ duty because it offered the kind of operational experience that looked good on military records. What we hadn't been told was that our sector had the highest rate of unexplained incidents in the entire zone. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson had delivered the classified portion of our briefing in a secure room at Camp Boniface, his expression carrying the weariness of an officer who'd seen too many reports that couldn't be explained through conventional threat analysis. "Gentlemen," he'd begun, spreading reconnaissance photos across the briefing table, "your sector has been experiencing anomalies that fall outside normal DMZ activity patterns, equipment malfunctions, personnel reporting unusual contacts, and communication disruptions that don't match any known enemy electronic warfare capabilities." The photos showed our patrol sector, a valley that ran roughly parallel to the border, surrounded by hills that provided excellent observation positions for both sides. But there were details in the imagery that bothered me even before Patterson explained their significance. "Notice the vegetation patterns," he'd said, pointing to areas where plant growth showed unusual characteristics. "These zones show accelerated growth in some areas and complete die-off in others, with no apparent environmental cause. And look at the wildlife distribution." The reconnaissance imagery showed animal populations avoiding certain areas of the valley despite the presence of food and water sources. Deer trails that abruptly changed direction, bird migration patterns that diverted around specific coordinates. Even insects seemed to avoid particular locations. "The North Koreans have been equally affected," Patterson had continued, showing intercepted communications that had been translated by intelligence analysts. "Their border guards are requesting transfers out of sectors opposite your patrol area, citing equipment failures and personnel experiencing psychological stress." Reynolds had raised the obvious question. "Sir, if both sides are experiencing similar problems, could this be some kind of natural phenomenon? Geological formations? Magnetic anomalies? Something environmental?" Patterson's response had been uncomfortably evasive. "Scientific teams have conducted surveys. Their findings are classified beyond your current security level. Your mission is to maintain observation, document any unusual occurrences, and implement the Silent Valley Protocol, if specific conditions are met." The Silent Valley Protocol was a set of emergency procedures that had been developed specifically for our sector. Unlike normal DMZ protocols that focused on responding to enemy activity, this one dealt with scenarios that fell outside conventional military threats. Morrison had been studying the technical specifications of our surveillance equipment, which had been modified with systems he didn't recognize from standard Army inventory. "Sir, this equipment includes sensors for detecting electromagnetic anomalies, radiation signatures, and atmospheric disturbances. Are we expecting enemy use of exotic weapons?" Patterson had hesitated before responding, choosing his words carefully. "The equipment is designed to detect phenomena that don't fit standard threat profiles. If you encounter readings that exceed normal parameters, you implement Silent Valley Protocol and request immediate extraction." The patrol route took us through terrain that should have been familiar after months of DMZ operations. But from the moment we entered the valley, something felt fundamentally wrong about the environment. The temperature was off. Not dramatically different, but inconsistent in ways that defied normal weather patterns. Cold pockets of air in locations that should have been warmer. Warm zones in areas that should have been exposed to winter winds. And the temperature variations weren't gradual. They were sharp boundaries where the air temperature changed by 10 degrees within a few feet. Hayes was the first to notice the effect on our equipment. "Sergeant, my NBC detection gear is showing anomalous readings," he reported, studying instruments designed to detect chemical and biological weapons. No specific threat signatures, but the baseline atmospheric composition is off. Morrison was having similar problems with communications and surveillance systems. "Radio equipment is functioning, but I'm picking up interference patterns that don't match any known source," he announced. "And the thermal imaging is showing temperature signatures that don't correspond with visible heat sources." Reynolds was studying the terrain through binoculars, comparing what he observed with our reconnaissance photos. "The vegetation growth patterns have changed since these photos were taken 3 days ago," he noted. "Areas that showed normal plant life are now showing signs of accelerated decay." As we moved deeper into the valley, following our assigned patrol route, the environmental anomalies became more pronounced. The wildlife that should have been present in the area, birds, small mammals, even insects, was completely absent. The silence was so complete that we could hear our own heartbeats, the sound of our breathing, the rustle of our equipment with unnatural clarity. "This is wrong," Reynolds said, his 15 years of infantry experience giving weight to his assessment. "Wildlife avoidance patterns this extreme usually indicate the presence of predators or environmental hazards, but we're not detecting anything that would explain it." Morrison was studying his surveillance equipment with growing concern. "The electromagnetic readings are increasing as we move further into the valley," he reported. "But the source isn't localized. It's like the entire area is generating some kind of field." We'd been trained to recognize signs of enemy electronic warfare, chemical weapons deployment, and radiation hazards. But what we were experiencing didn't match any of those threat profiles. The equipment was functioning normally, showing no signs of jamming or interference. Yet the readings it was producing defied normal environmental parameters. Hayes made a discovery that shifted our mission from routine patrol to potential emergency situation. "Sergeant, I'm detecting trace amounts of biological markers that don't match any known organisms," he announced, studying his NBC detection equipment. "The signatures suggest cellular structures that are too complex for environmental microorganisms, but too simple for any known pathogen." Reynolds was already on the radio, requesting guidance from our command post at Camp Boniface, but the response he received made it clear that what we were experiencing wasn't unexpected. "Patrol 6, this is base. Continue mission as briefed. Document all anomalous readings and prepare to implement Silent Valley Protocol on command." Miller had been studying the North Korean positions through his weapons optic, and his observations revealed that we weren't the only ones monitoring unusual activity in the valley. "I count at least 3 unmanned camera systems on their side that are all focused on this valley rather than our positions," he reported. "They're observing the same area we are." Both sides were monitoring the valley. Both sides were experiencing equipment anomalies, and both sides appeared to be more interested in whatever was happening in the neutral zone than in watching each other. As we reached our designated observation post, a concealed position that provided visibility across most of the valley, Morrison's surveillance equipment began detecting something that changed the entire nature of our mission. "Movement in the valley," he announced, studying thermal imaging displays. "Multiple contacts, but the heat signatures are wrong. Too cold for human body temperature, too uniform for natural wildlife. Through our optics, we could see them. Figures moving through the valley with deliberate purpose, following paths that suggested intelligence rather than random wandering. They were humanoid in general shape, but wrong in proportions. Too tall, too thin, moving with a gait that didn't match human biomechanics." Reynolds was counting contacts and assessing their movement patterns with the systematic approach of an experienced infantry NCO. "I count 12 figures, moving in what appears to be a search pattern. They're not North Korean soldiers. The uniforms and equipment don't match any known military." Hayes was studying the figures through binoculars equipped with NBC detection capabilities. "Whatever they are, they're not generating normal biological signatures," he reported. "No heat signature, no respiratory indicators, no electromagnetic field associated with living tissue." The figures were searching for something, moving methodically through the valley and stopping periodically to examine the ground, vegetation, and rock formations. Their movements were coordinated, but not in the way military units typically coordinate. There was no visible communication, No hand signals, no apparent command structure. Morrison had been recording video of the figures using our surveillance equipment, but the recordings weren't capturing what we could see with our own eyes. "The cameras aren't picking them up properly," he announced with growing alarm. "The digital imagery shows them as transparent, like they are not entirely solid. But we could see them clearly through direct observation, which meant whatever they were, they existed in a way that affected human perception differently than electronic sensors." Miller was studying the figures through his weapon sight, his training making him assess them as potential threats, even though they weren't displaying hostile intent. "They're armed," he reported, "carrying what looks like equipment or weapons, but nothing I recognize from any military inventory." Reynolds made the decision to implement the first phase of Silent Valley Protocol. Maintain observation, document everything, and prepare for immediate withdrawal if the contacts showed awareness of our presence. But as we watched the figures continue their methodical search of the valley, one of them stopped and turned directly toward our concealed position. Despite being over 800 meters away and hidden behind camouflage that should have made us invisible at that distance, it was looking directly at our observation post. Then they all stopped and turned toward us with synchronized precision. "They know we're here," Reynolds said, his voice carrying the controlled tension of a professional soldier recognizing a tactical disadvantage. "Prepare to withdraw on my command." Morrison was trying to establish communication with Camp Boniface, but his radio equipment was producing interference patterns that made transmission impossible. "Communications are down," he reported. "Not jammed, just not functioning, like something's preventing the signals from propagating." Hayes had noticed something disturbing about our physical condition. "Heart rates are elevated, but not from stress or physical exertion," he announced, monitoring the medical sensors we carried for NBC exposure assessment. "Our neurological activity is showing patterns consistent with external stimulation." The figures in the valley had begun moving toward our position with the same deliberate coordination they displayed during their search pattern. They weren't running or showing signs of hostile intent, but their approach made it clear that they were aware of our presence and were coming to investigate. Miller had his weapon trained on the approaching figures, but Reynolds held up a hand to prevent him from firing. "Stand fast," he ordered. "They haven't displayed hostile action. We don't engage unless directly threatened." But as the figures closed to within 400 meters, details became visible that made it clear we were dealing with something that fell far outside normal military threat assessments. Their forms weren't solid. They appeared to phase in and out of visibility, becoming more or less substantial as they moved. Their faces, when visible, showed features that were almost human, but distorted in ways that suggested they were either wearing masks or weren't actually human at all, and they were carrying equipment that definitely wasn't from any terrestrial military. Devices that seemed to shift and change configuration, tools that appeared to be solid one moment and transparent the next. Morrison was documenting everything with our surveillance equipment, but his recordings were becoming increasingly corrupted. "Digital systems are failing," he reported. "Something about these contacts is interfering with electronic storage." Reynolds made the decision to implement the second phase of Silent Valley Protocol, immediate withdrawal while maintaining observation, with orders to evacuate the sector if the contacts pursued beyond a designated perimeter. But as we prepared to fall back from our observation post, something happened that made withdrawal impossible. The figures in the valley suddenly stopped their approach and simultaneously turned toward the North Korean side of the DMZ. Following their line of sight, we could see North Korean soldiers emerging from their positions and moving toward the valley with the same purposeful coordination. The North Koreans were responding to the same contacts we were observing, which meant both sides were aware of whatever these figures represented, and both sides had apparently decided to investigate rather than ignore them. "This is unprecedented," Reynolds said, watching through binoculars as North Korean forces moved into positions that would allow them to intercept the mysterious figures. North Korean units never leave their fortified positions except during planned incursions. Hayes was monitoring NBC equipment that was showing increasingly anomalous readings. "The biological markers I detected earlier are increasing in concentration," he reported. "Whatever these figures are, they're having a measurable effect on the environment around them." Morrison had managed to restore partial communication with Camp Boniface using backup systems, and the response he received confirmed that what we were witnessing was part of a larger situation. "Patrol 6, Be advised that North Korean forces are moving into the valley. Do not, repeat, do not engage unless directly threatened. Maintain observation and implement full Silent Valley protocol. The figures in the valley had stopped moving as North Korean soldiers approached from one side, and our forces maintained observation from the other. They stood motionless, their forms becoming more solid and visible as if they were allowing themselves to be clearly seen by both sides. Miller was studying the tactical situation with growing concern. "We're exposed if this turns into a firefight," he noted. "North Korean forces have us at a disadvantage if they decide to engage our position instead of the contacts." Reynolds was making careful observations of the North Korean unit's composition and equipment. "They're not regular border guards," he concluded. "That's specialized personnel with equipment I don't recognize. They were prepared for this. Just as we had been specifically assigned to patrol this sector, the North Koreans had apparently positioned specialized personnel to respond to whatever anomalies occurred in the valley. Both sides had been aware of the phenomena and had been monitoring it with the same interest. Hayes made a discovery using his NBC detection equipment that revealed why both sides were so interested in the valley's mysterious occupants. "The biological markers aren't from these figures," he announced. "They're being generated by something beneath the valley floor. These figures are investigating the same thing we are." The mysterious contacts weren't intruders or enemy forces. They were researchers or investigators studying phenomena that existed in the valley independent of human military activity. Morrison was analyzing sensor data that confirmed Hayes' assessment. "Ground-penetrating radar is showing structures beneath the valley," he reported. "Man-made or artificial structures extending deep underground. Structures that predated the DMZ, predated the Korean War, possibly predated human civilization in the region, and whatever was in those structures was generating the environmental anomalies that had made this valley a special observation zone." The figures in the valley appeared to reach some kind of consensus, and then they did something that made both our forces and the North Korean unit take defensive positions. They began excavating, not with tools or equipment that we could see, but through some process that caused the ground itself to part, revealing an opening that descended into darkness beneath the valley floor. And from that opening came a sound that definitely wasn't natural, a low-frequency vibration that we felt in our bones rather than heard with our ears. "What the hell is that?" Miller asked. His weapon trained on the opening, even though bullets seemed unlikely to be effective against whatever was producing that sound. Reynolds was already on the radio, reporting the situation to Camp Boniface in clinical military terminology that barely captured the strangeness of what we were witnessing. "Base, this is Patrol 6. Contacts have opened an access point to underground structures. Request guidance on continuing observation." The response came from a voice I didn't recognize, not our usual communication officer, but someone with authority that suggested senior command was now monitoring our situation directly. "Patrol 6, maintain current position and continue observation. Do not approach the access point. Do not engage contacts unless they demonstrate hostile intent toward your position." But as we watched the opening that had been revealed in the valley floor, something emerged that made hostile intent seem like the least of our concerns. Lights, not artificial lights from human technology, but bioluminescent illumination that suggested living organisms or energy sources that defied conventional physics. And with the lights came more figures, dozens of them, emerging from underground with the same deliberate coordination as the ones who had opened the access point. Hayes was frantically documenting readings from his NBC equipment. "The biological markers are off the scale," he reported. "Whatever's coming out of there isn't just unusual, it's fundamentally different from any known form of life." The North Korean forces had taken defensive positions but weren't firing, which suggested they had orders similar to ours. Observe and document, but don't engage unless directly threatened. Morrison's surveillance equipment was capturing everything, though the recordings were corrupted by whatever effect the underground structures were generating. "This is insane," he muttered, watching through his camera as more figures emerged from beneath the valley. "We're witnessing first contact with something that's been here longer than human civilization." Reynolds was maintaining professional military composure, but I could see the strain of trying to process what we were observing through the framework of conventional military threat assessment. "Document everything," he ordered. "Whatever this is, command needs to know exactly what we saw." Miller had noticed something about their movement patterns that suggested they were avoiding specific areas. "They're staying away from certain coordinates," he observed, "like there are boundaries they won't cross." Hayes checked his NBC equipment against the coordinates Miller had identified. Those areas show the highest concentration of biological markers, he reported. Whatever's underground, it's strongest in those zones. The mysterious figures weren't just investigating the valley. They were mapping safe zones where whatever existed underground had less influence. They were studying the same phenomena that had made this sector a special observation zone, probably trying to understand it just as military scientists from multiple nations had been attempting. As we continued observing, one of the figures approached the boundary between the valley and our observation position. It stopped approximately 50 meters from our concealment, close enough that we could see details that had been obscured at distance. The face, when it became fully solid and visible, was humanoid, but clearly not human. Features that suggested intelligence and purpose, but arranged in proportions that indicated evolution along different pathways. And the eyes, large, dark, and focused directly on our position, with obvious awareness of our presence. Then it spoke, not in Korean or English or any human language, but in a sound that somehow translated directly in our minds as clear communication. You observe what your species is not ready to understand. The structures beneath this valley are older than your recorded history. They must not be disturbed. Reynolds was the first to find his voice. What are you? What's down there? The figure's response came with the same direct mental translation. We are guardians. The structures contain forces that shaped your world before your species evolved. They are dormant but not dead. Your military activities risk awakening what must remain sleeping. Hayes was studying the figure with his medical and scientific training. Are you warning us or threatening us? Warning, came the response. Both your nations have been conducting surveys of this valley. Both have detected anomalies. Both are planning excavation to investigate. This must not occur. Morrison was recording everything, hoping that the communication would be captured even if the visual documentation was corrupted. What happens if the structures are disturbed? He asked. The figure gestured toward the opening in the valley floor, and images flooded our minds. Ancient civilizations that had existed before recorded history, technological capabilities that exceeded modern science, and catastrophic events that had reshaped the planet's surface and eliminated those civilizations entirely. The forces contained in these structures ended the world that existed before yours, the figure communicated. They were sealed to prevent recurrence. Your species stumbled upon this valley by chance when dividing your territories. Now both sides seek to weaponize what they detect here. Correct, the figure confirmed. But your electromagnetic transmissions, your seismic activities from weapons testing, your underground tunneling, all of it is degrading the containment. What you observe as anomalies are early warning signs of containment failure. Miller had been listening to the exchange while maintaining security watch, and his question reflected the practical military mindset. If both sides stop their activities here, will the containment remain stable? The figure's response carried what might have been uncertainty. Unknown. Degradation has progressed significantly. We attempt repairs, but your species' industrial activities generate interference. Time may be insufficient. As we processed this information, trying to reconcile it with our military mission and the geopolitical realities of the DMZ, Hayes made an observation that revealed the immediate crisis we were facing. The North Korean unit is advancing, he reported. They're moving toward the underground access point. The North Korean forces, perhaps operating under different orders or lacking the communication we'd received from the mysterious figure, were approaching the opening with obvious intent to investigate or secure it. The Guardian figure turned toward the advancing North Koreans, and suddenly dozens more figures emerged from concealment in the valley. They formed a defensive line between the North Korean forces and the underground access, their forms becoming fully solid and their equipment shifting into configurations that suggested weapons. This is going to turn into a firefight, Miller observed, his training making him assess the tactical situation. And we're caught in the middle of it. Reynolds was already on the radio, requesting immediate guidance from Camp Boniface. Base, situation is escalating. North Korean forces are moving to investigate underground structures. Unknown contacts are establishing defensive positions. Request permission to intervene or withdraw. The response came with unusual speed, suggesting senior command had been monitoring our communications continuously. Patrol 6. Implement Silent Valley Protocol Final Phase. Establish communication with North Korean forces and coordinate de-escalation. You are authorized to share tactical information to prevent engagement. We were being ordered to make contact with North Korean military forces, something that violated every standard protocol for DMZ operations, except under the specific circumstances covered by Silent Valley Protocol. Reynolds made the decision without hesitation. Morrison, establish communication with North Korean unit. Use emergency frequencies and standard military protocol. Identify yourself and request coordination for mutual threat response. Morrison began broadcasting on international emergency frequencies, using Korean language phrases that had been provided for exactly this kind of unprecedented situation. North Korean forces, this is United States Army Patrol. Request communication for coordination on mutual security threat. Please respond. The response came in English with a heavy accent. American forces, this is Major Kim of Korean People's Army. We receive your transmission. Explain your purpose. Reynolds took the radio handset, his years of military experience helping him find the right words for a conversation that had probably never occurred in DMZ history. Major Kim, the contacts in the valley are not hostile to either of our forces. They are warning both sides that underground structures in this area contain hazards that should not be disturbed. Recommend we coordinate to prevent accidental engagement. There was a pause, and then Major Kim's response suggested he had been briefed on possibilities that matched what we were experiencing. American Patrol, we have received similar warnings. Our scientists detected anomalies and ordered investigation. You suggest we withdraw? Affirmative, Reynolds confirmed. The contacts claim that military activity in this valley risks activating systems that neither side can control. Recommend joint withdrawal and reporting to respective commands. The Guardian figure had been observing our communication efforts, and now it approached closer to our position, becoming fully solid and visible. Verification can be provided, it communicated directly to our minds. But both nations must agree to witness what lies beneath. Once seen, they cannot claim ignorance. Reynolds looked at me, and I could see him processing the unprecedented nature of what was being offered. We were being invited to enter underground structures that predated human civilization, accompanied by forces from both sides of one of the world's most hostile borders. Tell Major Kim we're being offered the opportunity to investigate the underground structures together, Reynolds said. Joint verification mission with witnesses from both sides. Morrison relayed the message, and Major Kim's response came with what sounded like dark humor. American Patrol. This proposal violates so many regulations that I cannot count them. But my commanders are authorizing participation. We proceed together, or conflict occurs. I choose investigation. And so, in a valley that had separated two nations for 50 years, soldiers from opposite sides of the DMZ prepared to enter underground structures that might explain anomalies both sides had been monitoring, led by Guardian figures that might have been protecting humanity from threats we hadn't known existed. As our squad linked up with Major Kim's unit at the edge of the underground access point, Reynolds radioed final confirmation to Camp Boniface. Base, we are proceeding with joint investigation as authorized by Silent Valley Protocol. Document our last known position. If we don't report back within 2 hours, implement containment procedures. The response came from that same unknown voice that suggested Senior Command was monitoring everything. Patrol 6, you are authorized to proceed. Document everything, and Sergeant, good luck. The Guardian figure led both our squad and Major Kim's unit toward the opening in the valley floor. As we descended into darkness illuminated only by bioluminescent light, I realized that whatever we discovered down there would change everything about how both nations understood the DMZ.